I'm pumped that you came here. Thank you very much.
I'm pumped to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're welcome. You're a busy dude. You're a successful dude. You're in high demand. And so for you to come out and spend 3 hours with me, touring around, looking at the space, going for lunch, it means a lot. I appreciate it whenever people do that. And so I wanted to just at least acknowledge you publicly for doing it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've been looking forward to spending time with you and getting to know you better. So I think we're accomplishing that.
I think we are.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, the snowstorm stopped us last time.
That's true.
I know.
I forgot about that. That's true.
Yeah, we were all set. And then, of course, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong.
It wasn't the train being canceled entirely and you having to figure out how to get to the city or park on the curb and get a ticket or a boot.
Oh, we got that done, though.
Yeah, you did.
Done too.
We always get it done.
That's it.
It is what it is.
Well, that's so we may as well start there.
Sure.
One of the things we were talking about when we were out for lunch is we were talking about when I was in the shit about a year ago. And prior to that, back in 2012, and your stories of being in it. And one of the things that you said was, listen, every great entrepreneur, every entrepreneur has a story of being in the shit. And something that I talk about a lot with our audience, with our clients, is that the best leaders, the best entrepreneurs are going to be the people who can teach from scars, not from wounds, and not from clean skin. Right? If nothing's ever gone wrong, how are you going to help people when something goes wrong for them?
Sure.
And if you're still in it, you're not ready to help anybody. You got to help yourself first.
Yep. We talked about that too.
Yeah. So I would love for you to share a little bit about how you get through moments like that in the early start part of your career compared to how you do it now.
First off, it's fun being a guest on a podcast because I've, in the last few podcasts, been the host. So it's funny that I'm on the receiving end of this and I'm happy to be so. But
you're a good host, by the way.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And we need to, reciprocate and make it happen.
I listened to a bunch of your episodes.
I'm going to force you to go to the city though.
I'll come.
I'll pick you up.
Okay.
So, everything you said is so true. Right. And I, at the core of what I do is I advise founders. Right. So every founder has a story. Every entrepreneur has a story, whether it's Steve Ells, the founder of Chipotle, or Dr. Sean, or Jay Siano. We all have stories of how we got started and how we evolve along the way, right? So speaking my own experience in business is didn't necessarily know what the hell I was going to do with my life post-college. Mom passes away from cancer. See that a lot of people make a lot of money in real estate on some level and figure out through my interests that I want to go into retail real estate. Don't even really know what that means. But when I discover the fact that people own shopping centers and that whole concept kind of blew me away. And that's how I started off in the business, but I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, right? The result of my mom passing forced me in two directions. One, becoming a workaholic to not sit and deal with the pain of the loss, and becoming an alcoholic, which is something that I didn't really realize up until very recently in my life, right?
So you were functional.
I was very functional. I was always a high performer, and it never stopped me, but I made so many excuses so I could have the next drink, and not feel ashamed about it, or the things that I would do when I was drunk, right? Like most functional alcoholics.
I imagine it was things like the client will be more comfortable if I'm also having a drink.
Yeah. I mean, you're always justifying, why you can have a drink and why going out to a dinner and, getting hammered is good for business. Right. So that kind of ties it back to your initial question. So, for me, starting out in business, it was almost like a means to have a certain lifestyle. And I never really realized that you can only grow your business as far as your own, what you're prepared to do yourself, right? How developed you are. And that's something that our friend, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, does with her clients, right? Like she works with really high performing people to help them be as great as they possibly can, physically, mentally, all those things. And I think, you know, for me, like my business would only grow to where I was in my own life. And now it's like hindsight's 2020, right? I was always the hardest worker in the room, you know, and so I really willed my way to a certain level of success. Like we were talking earlier, you know, now I realize that willing my way and hustling my way into things actually is a detriment, you know, where I'm not allowing my team, allowing my business partners to take the ball and run with it, to the extent that they should. And one of my closest friends and clients, Ann Malum, founder of SolidCore, who we were talking about earlier also, you know, taught me that a lot over the last 7 years, where, you know, you have to, in order to scale anything, you have to remove yourself. So the goal of any entrepreneur should be firing themselves from every position.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think the most fascinating thing that you shared there is actually what you said at the end. And I had a different question, but now I pivoted here. Your responsibility is to consult and advise founders and entrepreneurs. And you described learning a lot from the founder of SolidCore. And would you say her name?
Ann Malum, yeah.
Ann Malum.
Who I have to connect you to, by the way.
I would love to connect. I love that. I find that fascinating because I've had similar experiences. And what's interesting about it to me is it obviates that you sit in the seat of I don't know everything and I'll only share what I know. How do you toe the line with someone who's counting on you for advisement of, hey, I need to learn this from you and I'm going to teach you, and the financial relationship is you pay me?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The answer is reciprocity, right? I surround myself with great people that are much better than me at certain things. Having said that, I'm much better at them at certain things. And we work together to become better versions of ourselves, right? So I think that as a high performer and as somebody who's established themselves in a certain space and has some success 23 years later, overnight, yeah, a 23-year overnight success, you know you don't know everything. I have never been the smartest person in a room. And by the way, if you are, you're in the wrong room, right? But I've always, like I said, I've always been the hardest working and the one willing to, not always the hardest working. I mean, we're in some big rooms now. But you know, always I'm willing to, I'm a constant student of everything. And I learned very early on with my first client, you know, that worth mentioning, my first corporate client, my biggest client for a long time, Starbucks Coffee. The executive team at Starbucks taught me really early on that if you do not know something, do not make it up. Do not pretend to know it. Say, I am not sure, but I will find out and I will get back to you. And that was one of the biggest lessons, because the senior level team at Starbucks, these people are extremely bright. They're extremely experienced. They're the best of the best at scaling companies. And a lot of the top brass at other companies came out of the school of Starbucks or McDonald's or now Chipotle, like these big companies. And they're kind of baiting you in a way as a young person that, you know, is working along with them, building Starbucks or building Chipotle, whatever it is, right? So they want to understand your character. They want to understand how you operate, and there's a lot of loaded questions that are asked when you're spending 12 hours in a car, you know, touring an entire market. They're going to ask you, how many hospital beds does that hospital have? They're going to ask you a lot of questions that you may not be prepared to answer. How many registers are open at the Stop and Shop in this shopping center midday, right? Like questions that you wouldn't think are real estate related questions. And if you ever answered them wrong and they fact checked, it was your ass. And they take all that stuff very seriously to the point that you could lose the account entirely. And back in that time, I didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. So I would never run the risk of losing important business. And I knew that if I followed everything that they asked me to do, that I could ultimately be successful one day.
It's amazing. Like, I never would have thought that they would test people that way. And so are you supposed to know how many cashiers are open at Stop and Shop in the middle of the day? Or are you supposed to say, I have no idea? How would I know the answer to that question?
No, well, you learn along the way that you're supposed to know these things, right? Okay. So you actually, but you learn the hard way, right? You don't know on the first tour, you don't know, and it's asked, and they're just asking you to see how you respond. They don't expect you to know it, right? Like initially, if you've never been on a tour with a specific client that looks at something like that, a metric like that, right? Why are they asking the question? They're asking the question because they want to know the volume of that grocery store and how strong it is within the portfolio.
Because you're putting a Starbucks inside of it.
Correct. Not necessarily inside the Stop and Shop, bringing Starbucks into the shopping center, whether it's on, my entire career with Starbucks, which spanned 18 years as their exclusive real estate broker, it was almost entirely drive-through driven.
Okay.
So it was very rare that we were doing non-drive-through deals. So in this case, it would be like a pad, like a bank pad on a shopping center that we were converting over to a Starbucks, right? So these are all things like, in order to understand the health of a business, there's certain things. Prepared foods in a grocery store, it's very meaningful to understand what type of prepared foods they have. It tells you a lot about the customer. The customer of a grocery store tells you a lot about a neighborhood.
Just because I'm wildly curious about
it's so funny that we're going down this rabbit hole. I love geeking out on this stuff. Your audience is probably like, what the hell are they talking about?
No, you know what? My audience is going to take this ride. I'll tell you
good.
I'll tell you
love
why.
It.
Because this podcast I've left all of the episodes up. I'm embarrassed when I listen to the first 300.
You shouldn't be.
Well, thank you. Why
hear
not?
You.
Why not?
It's the development of us as thought leaders.
Okay, so that's why I leave them up.
Yeah.
I want people to be able to hear the full progression of where I was to where I am.
Yeah.
And ideally in 5 years, I'm going to say, man, I could have done such a better job with Jay. And we will.
We will.
And I want the people listening to this podcast to understand that if we're going to become the best versions of ourselves, we have to understand how other people think and how other people operate. If we're walking into a Starbucks or into a coffee shop, and we have no idea what makes it tick, then we're effectively zombieing through life.
Totally.
I find it super interesting to go into any place and say, I wonder why they did that. I wonder why they did that. Like that seems to cost more money than is worth it to. All of these kinds of things are constantly going through my brain.
Sure.
And I think it's worth it for people to be having that thought process for themselves.
I love that. I agree.
And so there's a Starbucks in Long Beach that's moving from the location that it's in to another location.
Yes.
And there's another location that has a drive-through that was a bank that your company now has the listing for.
Yes.
And the Starbucks agreed to go into what was formerly a Burger King prior to the bank deciding it was no longer going to be the bank.
That's correct.
I wonder if they would have gone into the bank had that not happened. And the reason why I'm asking the question is when you get off of the train, in order to get to the Starbucks where it's going to be, you're going to have to cross the main road and then a main cross street. So 2 crosses. To get to the bank where the Starbucks could have been had they gone there first, you don't have to cross any streets, and it's at the head of the same block where the Burger King was.
Yeah.
Do they make decisions that minutely?
The answer is yes, and there's so many variables, some that you're able to control, and then others that you're not, like timing of available real estate.
Right.
So, as I mentioned to you earlier, if I start a Starbucks deal today, right? It's I mean, I've had Starbucks deals that have had bar mitzvahs before they've opened, right? So to answer your question, yes, they are that intricate when it comes to the planning of new store development. But at the same time, the location of the train in a suburban market for a drive-through store is one thing versus a New York City.
That makes sense.
Right? Like the train stop, the subway where people are coming out of is way more important in an urban market that is not vehicular driven than it is in Long Beach, New York, that has a drive-through. Right? Because a very high percentage of the cups of coffee are going out the drive-through window. Regardless, the train is very important, don't get me wrong.
In the summer here especially.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But you know, the timing didn't line up.
Yeah. No, look, I'm not saying you blew it.
No, of course.
I imagine that deal went into process years ago because Burger King probably knew it wasn't going to renew the lease.
Correct.
Starbucks knew it needed a bigger space with a drive-through.
Yeah. Well, I'll take it a step further. The Starbucks is aware of and looking at every QSR that exists on Long Island and when they are potentially available.
QSR is?
Quick serve restaurants. Okay. So a McDonald's, a Chick-fil-A, a Burger King, right? So when you have concepts that have maybe, you know, run the natural course of their life cycle, like a Burger King, right? They're less popular today. Starbucks knows when every lease is expiring, essentially, and is already looking at their real estate while they're operating.
Love it.
So it's that intricate.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's, listen, when we were... when our intention was to open several locations this year of Active Life, we were planning to do something at a significantly smaller scale and just look at exponential locations with the expectation that they're going to be going out of business.
Which they will be.
Right, 100%. 100%. But it was the thought process was they have the zoning, they have the hardscape of the build out is done. Maybe some some reconfiguring, but you're not taking what used to be a restaurant, pulling a kitchen out and all. It's much simpler.
Yeah, it's what we in the industry refer to as second generation space.
Perfect.
So it's second generation for your current use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would love for you to go back a step because you told me a really interesting story at lunch that I think demonstrates what people need to be prepared to do in order to be successful when they don't have a reputation that's already there.
Yeah.
And I asked you,
which nobody does.
No, of course. Of course. It's funny.
Nobody does until they do.
100%. Yeah. I was talking to a team member yesterday and I said, you should be applying to give a TED Talk. You're a great speaker. And he said, you think I would have a shot? I'm like, not if you don't apply. And I imagine most of people who go to these sites don't apply because they don't think they have a shot.
Right.
And so by applying, you put yourself in the top 10%.
Sure.
And once you do that, you start to decide, okay, I actually want to do this. So what do I need to do to get accepted? And I think that you should start by applying. And so you mentioned how you got, I think it was Chipotle.
Yes.
Can you just walk people through what you did?
Sure. Yeah. You asked me, why did that person take the meeting with you is kind of how it sparked the conversation.
Cold called or cold emailed an executive at Chipotle.
Yeah.
Hey, my name is Jayson.
Yeah. I had the confidence because I was already Starbucks exclusive broker. Right. So, and that right there adds a certain level of credibility in my industry. Mind you, this was 2003.
So then how did you get Starbucks?
I was in the right place at the right time. I was invited to a meeting with a senior level broker to pitch the Starbucks account.
Okay.
I had no idea really what that meant at the time. And I ended up in the room pitching the account, which we were not prepared to do by any means. Mm-hmm. And I it was my first time being exposed to really what that is. Now, the gentleman that I went with ended up having practically a panic attack in the meeting with 5 or 6 Starbucks corporate, high-level execs. And I'm in the business for a year and a half, and I have no clue what I'm doing. And, but I'm charismatic. I have emotional intelligence. I know where I can chime in and not act like I know things I don't know, which ties back to, right? For me, that's a superpower, right? Most people are ego driven where they want to show people how much they know. And it's funny because I oftentimes will, do what Starbucks executives, used to do to me with other folks to see how much they'll talk, right? Mm-hmm. Actually silence is a superpower as well. So the meeting's kicked off and he's having a panic attack and I chime in if I may, and I go into talking about the company that I work for and, you know, how strong they are and the why behind, you know, why I chose to go work there and what we collectively do. I don't talk about myself because I don't collectively do shit at that stage of my life. And we left and I was mortified. And in the parking lot, I turned to this gentleman and I'm like, man, I don't think I have a career in this based on how bad that went. Like, thanks for the invite, you know, like, and we get back to the office and my boss at the time, now business partner, says, you know, calls us into his office and he already got a phone call from Starbucks. And he said, you know, essentially I have good news and bad news. What do you want to hear first? And I'm like, it's got to be bad news and bad news. And he's like, listen, you know, whatever you did, apparently they were kind of like, they felt bad for you, but you were so unprepared to the other gentleman. And he said, but, you know, they actually really liked you, Jay, and they want to invite you back with another senior level person to pitch the account. So we actually did prepare the next time, and we went in and we pitched the account and won.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then, So then now take me to Chipotle.
Yeah. So, you know, I took everything that I was learning and had learned up until the point that I first came across Chipotle while I was visiting friends from the University of Arizona, where I went in LA, and I was working out of a FedEx office. I think it was FedEx Kinko's, even before FedEx office.
That was, you created co-working at FedEx Kinko's.
There you go. Exactly. I'm sitting at a desk printing stuff. And I see this like interesting facade out of the window, which is a storefront. And I leave all my stuff and I walk across the street and I walk into Chipotle. Like it literally was calling me from the window. It was bizarre. And I walked in and I'm like, this is unbelievable. Like, what is this place? And I became immediately obsessed, and I just called corporate Chipotle until I can get in touch with somebody willing to listen.
Who are you looking for when you're calling?
I'm looking for the person in charge of new store development in New York.
And what do you say?
When I finally get in touch with the right person, I say, you know, I'm Jayson.
No, I'm sorry. I mean,
sorry.
Someone picks up the phone.
Yes.
Chipotle, how can I help you?
Well, it's the corporate office,
Sure.
right? So I probably started out emailing the corporate office to find the right contact at the corporate office. And we have different directories that give you kind of the corporate information. So I did that, and ultimately they put me in touch with a gentleman by the name of Mark Frankel, who was a former McDonald's person that had just gone not too long before to Chipotle, and was running, you know, either the Northeast or the East Coast for new store development. And when he and I first connected, I had to chase him down to even, you know, have a conversation with him. And we have a big industry event in Vegas in May that's actually just coming up here in a couple of weeks. And I literally designed the entire program for new store development for Chipotle in Long Island, New York specifically, where I already exclusively represented Starbucks. So I knew what I was doing, and I applied the knowledge that I now had with Starbucks to the Chipotle program, which is different because it's really more so like, you know, they could do dinner anywhere, dinner business anywhere. Lunch is a real big priority to them. So pre-COVID, obviously daytime population was a very specific thing. And I always need to, as I was telling you, learn as much as possible about what makes a location successful. So he and I were like going back and forth. He was giving me some of the information that I should be looking for. And then I designed the whole program, sent him enough information to get him interested to at least set up a meeting with me. So I brought all of the materials that I created to the conference in Vegas, sat down with him, and he literally looked at me when I showed up with all of my maps and my books that were like, you know, 2 inches thick on every market that I thought that they should be in and why. He looked at me and said, why did you do all of this work? Like, you don't even know if you're going to be working with me. And I said, well, because how else am I going to show you how hard I'm willing to work and that I think I'm on the right track at least. And where I'm not, you could educate me and teach me, and then I can help you. And it was that got me the gig.
Did he sign right there?
Yeah.
Are you open to sharing, like, how much money does something like that over the 18 years you worked with them generate?
Starbucks?
No, Chipotle.
I didn't work with them for 18
Got
years.
it.
Yeah,
Whatever
Starbucks 18 years, Chipotle a handful of years. You know, I mean, how much money does it
Is it
generate?
7 figures over that time period? Right,
Many
okay.
multiple 7 figures.
The reason I'm asking that is because you said to yourself, I'm going to do what nobody else is willing to, prepared to, or able to do.
Let me stop you.
Go ahead.
I didn't know that's not what people do.
Fair. Even once you did, I imagine you weren't like, oh, I'm going to stop doing this now.
Let me say that my experience with the gentleman who invited me to the Starbucks pitch, it should have became pretty apparent to me at that moment, right? When he's completely shitting the bed,
Right.
that's what most people do. Like that they're not like preparing to the extent that I am, but that didn't really dawn on me. Like I just assumed this is what everybody does. And if everybody does this, I got to do it even better than how everybody does it, right? Like that's the only mindset I have.
Right. So you spent how long prepping for that?
Weeks.
Weeks. It sounds like a lot.
And by the way, like I also, you know, I'm just the low level person at the company trying to get the marketing resources to pitch an account for a concept that nobody's ever heard of in New York.
Yeah.
Right? Like nobody knew Chipotle. I think at that point they had, you know, this is 2003, and they had, you know, they definitely had a couple hundred stores across the country, but they were West Coast. Like nobody in New York knew what Chipotle was at that point in time. They were just starting to come. My timing, by the way, was also great, you know, and that's luck.
The timing can be luck.
Of course.
But the preparation isn't.
Never.
And what the reason I wanted to go into that is because even if people hear this now and they're doing what you're trying to do, they're not going to do what you just told them that you did for Chipotle. They're not going to do it.
Of course not.
And then
that's why the last mile is never crowded.
Yeah.
The
last 5% is harder. Each percent is harder than the first 95.
Having said that, it's amazing to me that, you know, everybody has the same opportunity, right? Again, I'm not the smartest person. I never claimed to be. But the fact that I'm willing to sacrifice whatever I need to sacrifice to give myself the best possible opportunity to win, that's the difference, right? It's that grit. It's that chip on your shoulder when you have something to prove to yourself and maybe some other people, right? Like, you know, to your parents, right? Which I no longer have, unfortunately. But, you know, those are the things that, you know, you're either kind of wired that way or you decide by seeing other people and how they operate that you want that for yourself.
Well, you say that. And I know that you're dedicated to being a husband and a father too.
1,000%.
Right. And I admire that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. How do you, because you didn't just have your kids last week.
No.
Right? You have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Yes.
You're married how many years?
13.
So you were having to build this portfolio. You started your own business, 13 years ago?
Same
right?
time as, right after I got married and right when we were having our first son.
Did your wife know that this was the plan?
No, I don't think so. No.
I have a funny similar story there.
Yeah. I'm looking back. I'm like, no, I don't, you know, well, she listen, I could not do what I've done so far without her. And I could not do what I'm here to do without her. So, you know, I owe you know, she's just as much responsible for the success, right?
Right. So when the reason I wanted to pull that out is you said you sacrifice everything you need to sacrifice in order to do these things. And I imagine your line is it stops at family. Like you're not sacrificing the relationship with your wife or the relationship with your kids.
Now.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. So for me, again, like talking about how, at one stage of my life, I was so committed to drinking and to having a good time that traveling to a business conference was an awesome excuse to go hang out, get blasted till 3 a.m., show up to the meeting at 8 a.m. with, tequila on my breath, right? And to me, like my industry, commercial real estate as a whole, like traditionally, that's very common. That's just the way it is, right? So you kind of think like, well, everybody else is doing this. This is okay. This is what we're here to do. We're here to have a great time hanging out and talk about how miserable we are at home with our wife and kids. That's what we do. We work hard, we play hard, and we talk about how miserable life is.
So what was your come to Jesus?
What was my come to Jesus? I mean,
figure of speech, whether Jesus was a part of it or not.
I'm familiar with the figure of speech. I just over the years I got sick and tired of lying to myself. Like I was just operating. I was only able to reach the level of my own personal development, right? Which was a pretty good level. But after the fights with my wife, the fact that I'm either home when I'm home with the kids, drunk or hungover, feeling like shit, taking it out on them, these are all things that as I started to realize that was not who I wanted to be, right? And that was a multi-year process. I started to, to actually realize that I lost a lot of precious time. And, it's not just living in a fog as a result of alcohol. It's really that, I was traveling more than I should have been. And, I didn't necessarily have to be on those trips, like if there was a good party at one of those conferences, that was a big reason to, now later on looking back, like that was a big factor. It was the socialization and the good times. And, I came out of the nightclub world. I was a DJ. I have a ton of relationships in the nightlife restaurant world, which is also, a part of our business at Sabre. We do a lot of restaurant hospitality work, right? So it was a great excuse to be hanging out, being the guy who can get the reservation that nobody can get, and entertaining, right? This is all the stuff that when I was young and partying, I was like, one day when I'm in business, my relationships and the fact that I could drink a ton are going to work really well for me to be successful.
It sounds like your wife is a really patient and strong believer in who you're capable of being.
I have never heard it described that way, but absolutely. I don't know why she stuck around.
I get the chills thinking about it because if it wasn't for the support that my wife provided to me, I was never a big drinker like that.
Yeah.
But I was an absolute workaholic.
Yeah.
And it wasn't working. I was just grinding wheels because I thought that's the entrepreneurial thing. Like you just do all of it. And in hindsight, I think I needed that experience to know I can do that if I need to do that. And I can do it productively now.
Yeah.
But that it's not necessary and it's not even beneficial.
Yeah.
And we were on a walk one night and my wife turns to me and she goes, she was pregnant with our first daughter. And she goes, I don't want to be a single mother. And I just stopped in my tracks. She wasn't talking about leaving me. She was just describing you're never home. And when you are, you're not there. And she stuck with me through all of it, carried me for a long time. And so I get the chills hearing that you have a similar relationship with your wife where she knew who you were capable of being. I think it's really cool.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. And I don't really speak about the depths of, the bad times, where, the things that I'm really not, that I'm just ashamed to revisit in my mind of really who I was as a person. And, I lost my mom at a very young age. and dealt with major anger issues, you know, as a result of that. Like I just genuinely felt sorry for myself on some level, which I think is normal, you know, when you're dealing with trauma and loss of that magnitude. But at the same time, you know, you have to be willing to do the work. You know, you have to realize you have a problem, right? You have to, and my wife would tell me, like, you're fucked up. Like, you have a problem. You need to, like, you need to check yourself. Like, you know, and I'd be like, whatever, like, stop nagging me, you know? And until that was no longer, you know, it was no longer possible for me to lie to myself, you know, and just, and operate the same way that I was, you know, and listen, kudos to me for actually waking up and realizing it. And, you know, I will take that because you have to want it. You have to want it. Right. Yes. And then when I started, you know, all my friends are, you know, still love going out and, you know, drinking and partying and having great times. And I'm never about like telling people that they shouldn't be doing, like, do you? Like, I choose to live however you want to live. This is how I choose to live. And for me, like, I started to implement when I really wanted to slow down drinking initially and then ultimately stop. I started implementing challenges like 75 Hard, where I had an excuse that the people around me couldn't give me shit that I wasn't drinking. So I started doing that. And then I ended up doing 75 Hard twice in 1 year, like 3 times in 18 months practically. And, you know, I didn't drink for like the far majority of a year as a result of 75 Hard and just not wanting to anymore. But anytime that like my friends would be like, dude, come on, it's my birthday. Like, I'd be like, I'm doing 75 Hard, man. Like, I'm not starting this over. However, I'll just start over. You're 3 weeks in, start over. Like, you're no fun. Like, and now finally I'm out of that woods, right, where people don't even ask. Like, everyone knows. Why are you ashamed? Why do you have to be ashamed in this world of not drinking?
It's wild.
It's wild. And that's starting to change. You know?
It is. Well, I don't know if it is as much as it's changing in the circles that we travel in. Because if we go somewhere and someone says, oh, like, how do you like to work out? Oh, I don't work out. I just get fucked up.
Right.
But what are you doing here?
Yeah, totally.
Where if, like, I've gone into other circles.
Yeah.
And it's the opposite. So, oh, Mr. Super Health Nut over there. I'm like, I work out 5 hours a week.
Yep.
I know people who work out 15 hours a week.
Of course.
It's such a far stretch.
Yeah.
But so I'm curious, when you go through that kind of personal development, you're still surrounded by similar people because of the industry in which you work. It's in some ways, I imagine. When someone says something like, oh, just nice to get away from the wife and kids. Do you absorb it or do you check them?
I feel bad for them because, you know, I was never that miserable person that was like saying to some other human, like, oh, it's just good to be away from my family. I was never that. Right. But at the same time, I understand where they're coming from. Right. So I'm not judging them. I just feel badly because it doesn't have to be that way, you know? And I think that at the times in my life, if I ever had that thought, a lot of the reason that I had the thought was myself.
It's always yourself.
You know, but I don't think people are willing to, you know, to deal with the truth, right?
So do you ask them?
It depends who it is, you know, like, I think we're at a point now in life that, you know, as much as I want to help every person I possibly can, you have to really be, you really have to be maniacal with your energy. You have to be maniacal with your time. You have to, you know, which is why doing something like this with you, we can help people at scale, you know, which is always my goal, right? Everything's about scaling, right? And to go back onto something that you touched upon, you know, my industry, the people in my industry. No, I actually don't spend much time with the people in my industry because I don't relate to them.
Right.
Right. And I'm not trying to, right? Like, so I have a team of people and people on my team are way happier dealing with the types of people we're talking about, and can not only tolerate it, but thrive in it. I can't, you know? So for me, like this, a great example is that event is coming up in a few weeks in May in Las Vegas. When I go to Las Vegas now, I stay in the Red Rocks. I don't go to the Strip. I stay in the Red Rocks. I hike every morning at 5 a.m. And I'm just there to get the energy of the mountains and do exactly what I would be doing if I was home, right? And then I move on, right? So for me, I'm at Aspire in Miami with Dr. Gabrielle. The day before, I fly to Vegas. From Florida, and then I'm only there 24 hours doing what I need to do in that 24 hours. And then I fly to LA for a couple podcasts and meetings, and then I'm back in New York. And the old me would have been in Vegas for 5 days partying.
Right.
And that was the best. And my wife and I, you have no idea. I've almost gotten divorced over that conference 2 handfuls of times.
Oh, wow.
Literally, like to the point where like conversations about like, if we argue about this again, like we're going to get divorced. Like that word actually coming out as a result of this business conference. And my wife just didn't trust me because of the fact that I was making bad choices and drinking, you know? And like, I thought that was crazy at the time. Now I don't think it's crazy. Like I understand where she's coming from, but I wasn't ready for that. Like that's the bottom line. You know, I wasn't ready for it, and I would have fought to the death to convince her that this is a productive trip, even if I'm at a strip club at 4 a.m.
Right. So look, they gave you a ride there. They came to
Exactly. They came to pick us up.
So they don't drive
in
you
a
home.
limo.
They don't drive you home.
They don't.
So you said you have team members now who thrive in that environment.
Yeah.
How do you manage or lead, I should say, when you know I'm making assumptions, so I shouldn't do that. Are they developed beyond where you were when you were in that role, where they're not going out irresponsibly, where they're not getting themselves hammered, or is that what they're thriving in?
You know, everybody's at a different phase of their life, right? So for individual team members, you know, I support anybody on what makes them thrive and makes them happy, right? Overall, we're a healthy organization, right? But not every vertical within Sabre focuses on healthy lifestyle stuff. That's what I focus on, right? And I have a team of people that focus on that. But there's teams of people that focus on, you know, Popeye's chicken, and it is what it is, right? So, which is way more the traditional, you know, commercial real estate brokerage business,
I see.
Right? So people in my business are not necessarily, they're just looking to make a buck. They're not looking to link with folks that are like-minded and solely work with businesses they're passionate about. So that's rare. Like that's, I'm definitely a little bit of a unicorn in the business and in general.
Is that challenging for you? Because I know that you prefer to work with businesses that are helping people live healthier, happier, longer lives. You're employing people who are working with businesses that are not doing that, and those businesses need help too.
Right.
So there's no shame or judgment in you having that arm in your business. I'm curious if it's challenging for you as someone who needs to be able to lead a company that has both.
Yeah, it's not, because you don't forget, when I started out in the business, that wasn't even a thing. It was, how do I find businesses specifically in a geography in New York that I service that want to expand. And that's how I get paid.
Right.
And how I get paid is how I pay my rent and how I buy food. Right. When I, you know, after losing my mother, my father moved to Florida, got remarried within a handful of months, and was off and running, you know, doing his own thing. And I was on my own in my early 20s. So, you know, I always say, I always did things that I didn't want to do to ultimately one day hopefully be able to make a living doing things that I want to do, right? So, you know, I think that's important, because young people who are setting out to have their dream job like day one, it's like, you could do that, but you might not be able to afford, you know, much for a very long time, and who knows if ever, right? Like, if I wanted to be a musician or go on and just stay as a DJ, and, you know, very different career path. Could I have become a DJ spinning at the biggest nightclubs in the world with my relationships? I don't know. Could I have? Right. But the practical, side of me was always long-term thinking. So I was in a position in business doing things I didn't necessarily enjoy doing on some level. But anytime I got to the place where I really didn't enjoy what I was doing, I iterated and changed and specialized in the things that I want to do with the people that I want to do them with, which is a luxury, A. But going back to your initial question, no, because I own several companies and all of them do different things. And the healthy lifestyle national rollout advisory business that I'm referring to is where I spend almost 100% of my time. Mm-hmm. So I'm very okay growing a business that is way more traditional commercial real estate brokerage in nature, like the shopping center that we lease across the street from your business right here in Long Beach, New York, right? Like, yeah, there's a need for that, and we're really good at it. So, I and it's not to say that I don't like that business. I really love that business. That's a very important stepping stone for me and where I used to spend all of my time, right? So it's an evolution.
Well, Scott Galloway just talked about this on Bill Maher. I don't know if you've heard this clip that's going viral right now.
No.
He said, stop trying to find your passion and find something that you're good at that you can make money at, and then it will become your passion. And if it doesn't, you can go pursue your passion with the freedom financially that you've earned yourself.
Yeah.
There's nuance to how you want to interpret that. I got offered a job coming out of chiropractic school, actually. I was raising money from family and friends to open my first gym. And my uncle at the time was the CEO of an investment bank in Hong Kong. And one of his managing directors pulls me aside while I was in Hong Kong with my uncle, with my wife. And he says to me, forget your stupid little gym and your stupid little clinic. You're a Jewish kid from Long Island. That's your uncle. It's your God-given right to make millions of dollars in finance. He's like, you can bring your girlfriend with you or not. I'm like, she's my wife. And he's like, whatever. Doesn't matter. And he made me an offer. He's like, you don't even have to go home. I have a place for you to stay. It's furnished. And we'll get you all suited up. You'll be talking to clients by next week. And I said no. I'm happy I said no. And I'm often curious if I would have ended up in a similar place to where I am now with a different set of skills, a different set of financial freedom had I done that. I don't regret it. I'm not like, I wish I had.
Sure.
But I'm speaking to what you were just describing in that I had to struggle for 10 years.
Yeah.
Like really hard struggle for 10 years where I'm not talking about like I was making a bunch of money and I'm just complaining about what was me for how hard I'm working. I was putting in 18-hour days consistently, earning less than $30,000 a year.
Yeah.
Living off of my wife's income.
Yeah. Yeah. I have that same experience as you. Even when I was working on these great accounts like Starbucks and Chipotle, I was making no money because if I start a deal today, it would take me typically, let's call it 6 to 12 months to negotiate the deal. Mm-hmm. And, another 6 to 12 months potentially for the actual store to open. And traditionally in commercial real estate brokerage, we don't get paid until the store is open and operating. So, and the landlord's collecting rent. Mm-hmm. Now sometimes you get some, portion of that upon lease execution. And we've gotten very creative to generate cash flow quicker, but that's pretty customary, right? So like, even if I was negotiating all these deals, like I had no money in the bank. Right. It was always, and I was borrowing money to even though I had a very like cheap lifestyle, right? Like, I was borrowing money to live. And so when I started to finally make money, I was just paying off the debt, and then when I'm finally in a position, I transition to CBRE in January 2007. I go out and, door knock, and I discover a company called Massage Envy for the first time, an Arizona company. And I link up with the area developer that owns 5 states. And that was my first foray outside of New York into, and also, you know, everything like Chipotle, Starbucks were corporate in nature. So Massage Envy was franchised. And that was the first time that I realized, wait a minute, like I could work with one client, like in other parts of the country. And there's opportunity to get involved beyond just the real estate strategy and site selection process, which is the traditional, you know, commercial real estate brokerage. That's when like I really like found what I was passionate about and what I really enjoyed doing. But I starved for years. And, you know, my father at the time he would ridicule me that I was paying essentially I was 1099, no health insurance, and I was not collecting it. You know, there's no such thing as a salary for somebody who's 1099. You eat what you kill. It's sales. And he would just, you know, he would make fun of me about, you know, what it is I was doing. I had no support, no encouragement. And my family was successful. You know, my father was very successful, owned car dealerships. I was given the keys to a car dealership to go walk into and take over. I said no. So I understand your position but you know what? Like I was very young making the decision not to go into the family business on the heels of losing my mother, you know, and it wasn't my business. You know, it was my father's business, and he made it clear to me that he wanted to sell. He wanted to retire, you know, everything that he was going through with the loss of his wife. You know, I said, listen, do what you need to do, you know, and I, in my mind, didn't want to be the boss's son, taking over the entitled, you know, kid. I never wanted to be that. But, you know, fast forward to now, you know, the 23 years of fucking pain and getting punched in the face and losing money and borrowing money and not being able to find somebody to borrow money from, you know, which is the most interesting thing as an entrepreneur. It's like, it's the American dream. And I have a very specific niche that I'm pretty good at and have built a pretty successful company on. But if I go to a bank, you know, not now. Now banks will lend to me, thank God, when I don't need the money, right? Like, you know, but when I needed the money, when I was starting my company, I mean, we were not financeable. I had to go out and borrow money from, you know, high net worth people at 11, 12%. You know, like how are you supposed to get ahead borrowing money at 12%? You know,
really
you're borrowing millions of dollars. I'm not talking about borrowing 50 grand.
Right.
You know, like think about the interest. What's the amortization on a 30-year loan for $2 million at 12%? A lot of money. You need to make a lot of money just to break fucking even. Yep. You know, so all the things that I talk about now, it's like, and people ask me about, you know, what you were reflecting on for yourself, right? Like, you know, thinking about what if it went this way? What if I chose this path? What if I honestly tell people, like, I wouldn't have done this over again. Like, I wouldn't do this over again.
Right.
You know, like I thank God I really had something to prove at that stage of my life because, you know, and there were many times that I went out of business. There were many times I went out of business.
Is there anybody you know who...
And by the way, I drank. If I wasn't drinking to numb myself, I wouldn't have made it. I honestly believe that. If I was completely sober at those stages of my life with young kids and the stress that I'm talking about of owing a lot of money to people and watching that balance tick up, not down, I think I made it through a lot of those times because I was numb.
That's really interesting. I'll close by sharing another commonality that we have. The clinic I associated in for 2 years at the chiropractic school. That was my father and my uncles.
Okay.
They were very successful. It could have been step right in.
Yep.
And my father was on his way out. He'd already been in the clinic for like 30 years. Could have taken his spot, learned from my uncle, and just had something successful. I had the same rugged individualism in me that you describe in you, where it's even
for
if
better or worse.
Yeah. Even if I want to do this, I can't. And my last question for you is, I'm curious, do you know anybody who's done anything that is exciting to be around who would tell you, if I looked back and was starting all over again, I would do it again, knowing the uncertainty that was going to come along the way? Or is it more people who get started and then we're just pot committed, our ego is on the line, our financial future is on the line, our vision is on the line, and so we're going to do it hell or high water?
Yeah, I mean, today I'm blessed to work with some of the most interesting and successful founders and entrepreneurs in the country, and and able to call a lot of them friends. And I think there's this blind optimism that we all share on some level. Even as dark and as down and out as I was at stages of life, I always had blind optimism. Mm-hmm. Like, it's all going to work out. I know for a fact, if I wake up every fucking day and work my ass off and do as much as I can in a 24-hour period, that one day, it might not be 5 years, it might not be 10, it might not be 15, it might not be 30, it might not be, I'm going to be like, something's going to happen as a result of all of this energy that's put into, the growth of something. And, I have this aggressive patience, this marathon mindset when it comes to business. And by the way, like, I also get the amazing opportunity now to invest in people and brands at very early stages, mm-hmm. right? So I oftentimes am betting on the jockey, mm-hmm. not the horse, right? So I have to evaluate exactly the characteristics of they could be the brightest person on the planet, but if they do not understand what they're up against and the discipline that it's going to take to get over those hurdles for this company to really be what it looks like it already is, if they don't understand that and they're not willing to sacrifice everything in their life to do it, I'm not putting my money in. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question more directly, you have to be, in order to be Ann Malum selling Solid Core for $100 million, you have to sacrifice a lot. I've sacrificed a lot, but I started my company, I started my family at the same time, and it wasn't easy, but I knew that I could do it deep down because I would be willing. At the end of the day, if I'm being really honest, and it still holds true, if I had to spend more time away from my family to ensure my success, I would, because that's my fucking responsibility to provide the life that they deserve. And ultimately, that's one thing that is very clear, and my wife would support it. She doesn't have to worry anymore because I'm a loser and I'm in bed at 9 p.m. and doing an ice bath at fucking 6, so it's different now. But, it's my responsibility as a man and as the leader of my family and as the leader of my companies to make sure that we're all winning. So I'll do that come hell or high water.
Jayson Siano, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, man. This was fun.
Yeah, turn pro. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Active Life Podcast. Please remember, give us a hand, rate it, review it wherever you listen to shows. We are on a mission to humanize the healthcare industry by professionalizing the fitness industry to empower the individual to live a life unlimited by the way that their body looks, feels, or performs. If you are inspired by that mission and want to jump on the wagon, find us anywhere. Active Life Professional on Instagram, Active Life RX on Instagram. Come to me personally at Dr. Sean Pastuch. We want to welcome you onto the train. We want you to be a part of the mission. We want to offer you the opportunity to pursue this right alongside us. We're inspired by your effort, and we hope to help you in your journey. Turn pro.